Well, hello, and welcome to All Church Sunday School. My name is Shannon Moore, and I'm here with my friend
Renee Hoke.
How are you, Renee?
Glad to be here as your sidekick.
Well, we're each other's sidekicks,
That's right.
Yeah. Well, we are continuing this journey through this beautiful book called An Altar in the World by Barbara Brown Taylor. Her name's almost like a tongue twister.
Barbara Brown Taylor.
Barbara Brown Taylor. Say that 3 times fast. We have a couple more weeks in this book. We're going to do today, and we're going to do 2 more chapters after this. And what do you think of this book so far?
I love it. I like the idea that no matter what we're doing, we don't have to drive to the church to be holy.
Right.
She's teaching us this very practical way, very helpful as, we remember what it was like when the church was closed for a while. Mm-hmm. So this way of looking at our everyday life and finding, I especially like the conversation today, and finding these possibilities to encounter God in some ordinary way. So I can't wait to talk about our topic for today.
Me too. I hope that you have gotten this book somehow. If you haven't, it's not too late. This would be a good purchase for any time. This is a book to savor, not to read through quickly. So look on Amazon or eBay and get yourself a copy. And even if you haven't gone through these chapters with us, you can always go back and look at the episodes again, or just read it on your own. But
I think that this could almost be an annual meditation in your life.
I think that's right.
Because just a reminder again, there's this and this. There are all these ways to be in God's presence.
Yes. Well, today we are looking at chapter 6, and it is titled "The Practice of Encountering Others." And the subtitle is Community. What really speaks to me about this, Renee, is she talks about being an introvert. You're not an introvert, are you?
No, I am not. But you are.
I am an introvert.
So you really...
And I want to share what she says here. She says, it can be difficult to be an introvert in church, especially if you happen to be the pastor. Liking to be alone can be interpreted as a judgment on other people's character. Other people's company, not character, company.
Have you ever felt that?
I absolutely have. And I often tell people that I'm not an extrovert, but I can fake it pretty well. So on Sunday mornings, I'm usually out greeting people, talking to people, shaking hands. But it exhausts me.
It takes lots of energy.
And so very often, as soon as the last service is over, I make a beeline out of there. And I know some people probably think it's because I don't want to talk to them, but I'm literally...
You're out of gas.
I'm just out of gas.
You're like a car without any fuel in the tank.
Yeah. So...
And it took you a while to understand how to protect your well-being, right? And to have the courage to know to pull away,
right,
and explain to people, this is what I'm doing for myself. Mm-hmm. And be okay if not everybody understands.
Well, and it's been different being at a church this size. If you're at a church, as most of my church experiences have been, one service or Sunday school and then church, but now we have 4 services to navigate, and a Sunday school and other various activities. There's a lot going on Sunday morning.
So you are really out of fuel by the time you get to noon on Sunday, aren't you?
Yeah, and not to make that sound complainy in any way. It's just how I'm wired.
Exactly.
So, and it's not that I don't enjoy talking to people. I do, but as you put it, I ran out of gas.
You have to recharge.
Yeah. So I'm glad that it was nice to read this and to get a little bit of affirmation that I'm not the only one that feels that way.
And she made a decision and wrote a book about it that she couldn't be a priest anymore. Mm-hmm. That was just too difficult. And she was at I believe, a smaller church where everything was on her.
Yes. And I remember reading that book. It's called Leaving
the Church.
Leaving Church or something like that. And because it was a small church and because she is such an engaging preacher, they were getting ready to do a capital campaign, make a bigger sanctuary and that sort of thing. And one of the people in her church said, I'm not willing to change our church so that you can have a bigger audience on Sunday. And I think that was sort of she was like,
final.
I don't want to do this anymore.
It wasn't for her.
But That's a different book.
That's a different book that's
hearing
very
this.
popular
And
as well.
She's talking about encountering others, and you have found some beautiful artwork to share
Icons
today.
of the desert fathers and mothers. What do you know about that movement? Do you know when it happened?
Around the 4th century, and the church was becoming Christianity was becoming the church of the Roman Empire, and so these desert fathers and mothers were faithful people who, as Barbara Brown Taylor puts it in her book, they realized that between religion and politics, which one of those was going to rise to the top, and they chose to separate themselves from living in a city or living around a lot of other people and moving out into the desert for a life of solitude, prayer, fasting, meditation, work, selling everything they had, giving it to the poor. It seems like we've read that somewhere.
Seems very
Sounds
Christ-like,
familiar.
doesn't it?
But
Except he didn't go. He just went out in the desert for 40 days.
right. But even though these desert fathers and mothers lived pretty solitary lives, they knew where each other were and would get together occasionally for communion, for meals, to work together as a way to know that you can't rely only on yourself, that life requires some dependence on other people.
And it was even possible for pilgrims to go out and spend some time with their favorite desert father or mother
and
be blessed by that.
And be blessed or get some difficult truths revealed.
You know, I discovered when I was looking for these icons, a lot of writing. I think that we've just been in a period of time when a lot of writers have focused on the wisdom of the desert fathers and mothers. You can find all kinds of books, all kinds of YouTube documentaries. Mm-hmm. It really, if you're curious about that, if you haven't heard too much about this, it's really in the spotlight right now, and you can find lots of resources. I think it's an interesting period in Christianity, mm-hmm. and I think that women are surprisingly visible. When I was in seminary, we just talked about desert fathers. Mm-hmm. But there were lots of desert mothers, too. And so it seems like a 50-50 thing of women also pursuing that more contemplative life. Could you have been a desert father?
I don't know that I would have had the wisdom to be a desert father.
But then you go out there, and the wisdom is part of
hopefully that
more time with God, right?
Comes. But yes, there has been a time in my life when I thought that being a monk might be the path for me. So that does.
Even I can see you as a monk.
I just have to let this part of my hair grow out.
But
I'll leave this part bald.
So
no
you look like
there.
Friar Tuck.
Yeah.
I think I would like to be a mountain mother, not a desert mother.
Not a desert mother.
You can go away to a cooler place with some trees.
Can you
would be more attractive
Can you
to
be a
me.
beach father?
A beach father.
Oh my goodness. Well, shall we read a little bit of?
I think that Barbara Brown Taylor told us about this to say, yes, it's good to go away and be at home, be alone with God, but there's something very holy that happens when we're around people.
Right. Because even these desert fathers and mothers whose lives were spent mainly in solitude knew that you had to have some interaction with other people to be part of the community of faith.
I, of course, as an extrovert, fully believe in that, and I struggle with too much time alone. I'm energized by being around people. I love the way that she describes a certain kind of interaction with other people.
Yeah. Well, you want to read that for us?
The practice of encountering others. As often as I think I'm seeking other people out in order to get something for myself, the deeper truth is that I am hoping they will draw me out of myself. If you've ever gotten into a conversation so compelling that you could not believe what your watch said when you looked at it, then you know what I mean. If you've ever spent a Saturday volunteering at the Special Olympics, taking Meals on Wheels to the elderly, or picking up trash with the river keepers, then you know that you can arrive back home dirty and tired, but also oddly refreshed, with more lift in your heart than you could have gotten from a day at the beach. In the Christian mystical tradition, one name for this phenomenon is divine union. It is not achieved as much as it is given. The often fleeting but fully memorable gift of escaping the small self long enough to glimpse wholeness. Everything that exists in this wholeness. Everything that lives in this light. This is the one community that matters, the one toward which all others reach.
I think there's something very important about this idea of being a part of something bigger than ourselves. We talk about that probably most often in the context of giving, stewardship, that our small gifts combine with other people's and remind us that we're part of a bigger whole. But in a more spiritual sense, even than that, this idea of divine union, of reaching out, of serving others. As I was reading this, you know who I was thinking about?
Who?
Reverend Jessica Vaquetta.
That's right.
I think about her last summer when all the protests were going on downtown, and every day she would go downtown and she didn't carry a sign.
And she loaded up a wagon with water.
Up a wagon with water.
And she had sunscreen.
Yep.
And she just engaged people
That was
who'd been standing outside for a long time in the hot sun.
Yep. And for her, I mean, that was
holy ground for her.
Yep.
Sometimes I worried that she was just going to wear herself out. But I think there's some appeal that phrase divine union. I don't know that I've ever heard that used before, but I know I have experienced that.
Yes.
When I was first in seminary, I was a youth minister, and we took a trip in the summer to a nice place and swam, and all of those teenagers did was complain because they go on nice trips and they wanted room service, and it really made me mad. So, note to self, from this point on, we're going to use this to have an experience they wouldn't have with their family. And it was hard work, and it was someplace where you got to see people struggling and people feeling blessed who didn't have a lot of material wealth. And something happened in those days. Something besides us working hard and me trying to make sure nobody hammered, a nail into their hand, and something else was going on. It changed how we were together. It changed those teenagers. When I got to be a senior minister, I couldn't bear to give up that experience. So while the youth minister figured out what to do with the kids in the summertime around missions, I decided to have adult mission trips. And the same thing happened with adults. Something about leaving your small self behind, what Barbara Brown Taylor says, and being engaged in work that you understand as an expression of Christ's calling on our life. Something happens that I'm glad to have that phrase for it, divine union, because something transforming happens that I don't experience any other way.
And it reminds me a little bit of the chapter we read, I think last week, about getting lost. Was that just last week? And taking a different direction than the normal path. And she says this is one of my favorite quotes in this whole chapter. She says, if you always do what you've always done, then you will always get what you've always got.
If you feel like you're in a rut, I think those are words to live by.
Yep.
That just stepping out, and it's uncomfortable. But when we see that opportunity, she talks about people going around the world to experience that divine union. But she kind of says, you don't have to travel very far at all
Right.
to pay attention to that and to step out That is like stepping out of the cow path, stepping out of the normal routine to engage with people you might not know well, an opportunity to do a good deed that turns into something beyond your expectations.
And the way that she describes it, there's even to do it with people that you encounter every day. She talks about not of seeing yourself in other people, seeing God in other people, and you don't have to go a long way to do that.
You don't have to go
it
to
can
India.
Be as quickly, as close as the grocery store.
Isn't that encouraging? I think this chapter is so important.
It is, because I think a lot of us get in this mindset of we are the star of the show and everybody else is our supporting cast. A friend of mine this past Sunday went to a restaurant down the street between services and was going to just run in real quick and grab a bite and bring it back to the church. And when they got back out, there were 2 cars blocking the drive, and it was a student and her mother, and they were unpacking stuff out of the car and telling stories and laughing, and there were 3 people waiting to couldn't get out of the parking lot, and people were blowing the horn. And my friend got really mad, as anybody would. But I thought,
we miss when we're so
we
much about our agenda
and what we need and what we want at this moment is the most important thing. We're missing the mark.
It's really good. It's really good to. And I'm imagining you're thinking now about times that you've had that divine union. Maybe you've been part of a day-long mission, or you've worked at the food bank, or whatever that was. That connection, that holy connection, that to me is just like being in a great worship service. Mm-hmm. It's just as holy.
Yeah, and it's almost better than the worship service in a lot of ways, because sometimes the worship can, if we allow it, can get we fall into the rut.
If we use worship to charge our battery and then push ourselves out, following worship, then we become part of what God is doing in the world. I heard somebody say once, God is already in that neighborhood. Mm-hmm. You're not taking God to that neighborhood. You just go figure out what God is doing and give God a hand. Mm-hmm. Because God's already there. It's not about us.
Right. Because the thing about worship is very often in worship, most of the folks, we're all the same club or the same groups. But she talks a little bit about people who aren't in the same groups as we are.
Strange.
You want me to read that?
Yes.
She says, there are people in all of our communities who do not belong to any of the same groups we do. Some of them stand right in front of us at the gas station, the post office, or the grocery store, where they largely remain invisible to us. Our community with them is human community, such a broad connection that is easy to overlook. You want me to keep going?
Keep going.
At its most basic level, the everyday practice of being with other people is the practice of loving the neighbor as the self. More intricately is the practice of coming face to face with another human being, preferably someone different enough to qualify as a capital O other, and at least entertaining the possibility that this is one of the faces of God.
I love that. I love the way she describes it very simply, and it's expansive. Think of I think of thanking somebody who's helping me with some ordinary thing during the day, and realizing as I walked away, probably because I've read this book, that I didn't make eye contact, that I didn't even look at the person. I said thank you, but I missed the chance to connect with that person. Then I almost want to go back and say something else, but then that person who's a stranger would probably go, what's the deal with this woman? So
yeah,
I miss a lot of opportunities because I'm just in a hurry.
I do try to do that with cashiers, and especially if I'm on the phone, I really make an effort to either say I'll call you back or put the phone down. And I had a cashier one time thank me for that. I said, to the person I was talking to, I'm at the checkout, let me call you back. And she thanked me.
Because that made her important.
Right, because
Important enough.
that she wasn't just a machine
Right.
that was waiting on me, that she was a person.
Really.
So I was glad that I thought to do that. But somebody else told me, I can't remember who it was, but we were talking about when people ask for money, like if you're walking down the street, even if you don't have anything to give, to look somebody in the eye, to acknowledge their presence is important, because I think a lot of times when we know we're not going to give money, we don't have money to give, we're embarrassed. We don't know what to say. It's uncomfortable. But to just take a moment and acknowledge that person's humanity
being, yes.
is an important thing.
That's just so important, such a small thing.
But uncomfortable.
And it makes us, when we do that, when we don't let the discomfort keep us from doing the right thing, it's blessing. It's always a blessing, don't you think?
Yeah, oh yeah.
It's always a blessing to see the humanity in that person.
Right.
But it's hard. I'm wondering what you're thinking about. Maybe after you finish with All Church Sunday School, you're going to be out running errands. And you can have a little, there's a kind of formula that she uses for how to warm up.
Okay.
Why don't you read that?
Okay. She says a good way to warm up is to focus on one of the human beings who usually sneak right past you because they are performing some mundane service, such as taking your order or handing you your change. Here is someone who exists, even when she is not ringing up your groceries. That's the most important thing, I think. She is someone's daughter, maybe someone's mother as well. Mm-hmm.
And just imagine that person's life and what they do. I think I've never had anybody who wasn't willing to be engaged if you said, how are you doing today?
Right.
You know, oh, are you almost off work? Or I bet has this been a long day? Mm-hmm. I've never had anybody who wasn't happy to say, yes, I've been working really hard, or, oh, I'm getting ready to go to a birthday party, or just so for us to be human together.
Yes, and not just be waited on.
And that's practicing curiosity, too, which is one of our core values, don't you think?
Yes.
To be interested in another person, interested enough to... So the scripture that Barbara Brown Taylor uses is Matthew 25. She says that is Jesus coaching us to encounter others.
Will you read it?
I will. The king will come and say to those at his right hand, "Come, you that are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me." And then those people who are surprised to be honored say, "Well, I never saw you. I never saw you, King, anywhere." And the king explains, "No, but you paid attention to my people.
Right.
You did this for other people. That counts. That is me. You were serving me." And the people who thought they were all that and were just waiting for the special plaque they were going to get at the end, but had always been about themselves.
Right.
And so the king said, I never saw you. You weren't out helping.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a real challenge, too, with social media and just the way our culture is now. There's so much focus on individual perfection, individual accomplishment. It's all about getting our brand out and that sort of thing. And to really be able to step away from that, that's another challenge, another uncomfortable thing.
But it probably gets easier with practice, just like any kind of training, right? Mm-hmm. We can use her formula, somebody that you wouldn't normally pay attention to, and you just stop and you pay attention to that person, you imagine them, what their life is like, you engage them.
Right.
The more we do that, I bet the more comfortable it becomes.
Right. You don't have to jump right into Vacetta level service.
in the middle of the protest.
In the middle of
serving cool water. But she was offering water to people who were thirsty. I mean, that was Matthew 25 that she
Right.
was doing.
So we began just by an altar in the world. What's there in front of us? What the people who are in front of us, the opportunities that are in front of us, to just be kind and to acknowledge another's humanity. You don't know what you'll get back in return either from an exchange.
So
like
let's
that.
let's all agree, if there's enough time left in the day, if you're not watching this at midnight, let's take up the challenge that Barbara Brown Taylor gives us, and let's engage with somebody. Let's encounter another human being
Let's do it.
off the path before the day is over or
Will you-
first thing in the morning.
And will you email us with how it went? I'd love to hear the
Yes.
stories.
I would love to hear it.
And maybe we could share a couple next week.
Okay. That'd be great. We'd love to hear from you.
Yes, absolutely.
acss@uccftw.com.
Yep. And we get those emails. So that would be great.
So what's the chapter for next week?
Well, we are not going to do the whole book. We're going to jump ahead. We're going to do 2 more weeks. So next week, we're going to look at chapter 8. And you're leading that one.
Yes.
The practice of saying no, Sabbath.
Very important.
And then following that, we'll end up with chapter 11, the practice of being present to God.
This chapter 8, the practice of saying no, was so significant. She actually wrote a whole book around this chapter. I've read it,
Ah.
but I can't tell you. I'm saying no.
Tell me about it, Renee. No.
No, I will not.
All right. Great chapter, great book.
Yes, pay attention to people.
Look forward to hearing from you with your story of encountering other people. I hope that you have a great week, and we will see you next time.